I'd like to introduce our speaker, Cassie Brand. Cassie is curator of rare books at Washington University Libraries in St. Louis, and I know she is thrilled to have a means of sharing our rare book collections with you virtually since we cannot yet welcome visitors back to Olin Library. Cassie's research focuses on the intersection of the book as a physical and cultural object and the histories of book collecting in libraries. In whatever spare time she can find, she is working on a PhD. Her dissertation, which is in progress, is titled How Books Became Rare, the History of Special Collections in America, 1880 to 1940. Her talk today is about movable books in the Washington University Library's special collections. Without further ado, join me in virtually welcoming Cassie Brand.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. I am super excited to share these books with you. This talk came out of an exhibit that was supposed to go up last year, of course, before everything changed very drastically. And we will be installing it hopefully next month. And so I wanted to share, just a bit of what I've been able to learn about movable books and their mechanics through working on this exhibit. We have several different movable book collections. We have the Bob Smith collection. He was a WashU professor and collector of movable books and paper engineering. And also the Susan Schwartz collection. She also collected Popup Books. And we also find movable books throughout many different collections within rare books, including the Arnold collection, which is mostly centered on signs, symbols, and languages. And so it's been really interesting to see kind of how these movable books are really in all areas of the collection. As Shannon said, please use the Q&A for questions, which I'll be answering at the end of my talk. But if you'd like to make comments throughout, please feel free to throw those in the chat. I probably won't be able to monitor those as I'm presenting, but sometimes I can learn things from our audience, so please feel free to throw those in. I'm going to be going slightly chronologically today, also slightly grouped together by category. And we're going to start with some of our earliest movable books. So movable books really go back to probably the 12th century, as much as we can tell. They were used in Arabic medical treaties and Persian astronomy books. This is the earliest one we have. This is a manuscript that was written around 1516, and it's of an earlier text. So this was hand copied. The text is by Raymond Lull, L-L-U-L-L, and it is called Ars Demonstrativa. And what we find here for the movable part is called a volvelle. And this is a spinning wheel that can be used in different ways so that you can, stack these letters on top of each other in order to use the wheel. I was looking into this one because we don't know a whole lot about this book or this author, and even less about the person who hand copied it, but people think that this might either be a mnemonic device, so something to help you memorize things, or there's some theories that this could actually be used to show all possible truths in the universe. That Lull had this idea that there was a limited number of basic truths and concepts, and everything could be kind of traced back to those basic truths. So you can see how that would be working here. And later in the book, you can see this hand is very tiny, but in these boxes would be those symbols that you saw on that volvelle wheel. So I need a researcher to come in who reads Latin to study this book a little bit more and tell me more about it, but I think it's really fascinating, especially since it's handwritten. So one of the major uses of movable books in the earlier period are flaps that you would be able to lift. And this is Descartes' book on man. And it's what we can refer to as a flap anatomy. So you can see here how this lifts up so that you can see more of what's going inside the heart. And flap anatomies are really fantastic because they mimic what would be going on in dissection, where you're kind of peeling back layer by layer to look underneath and see what's going on within the human body. In this time period, it can also be very difficult to procure cadavers for dissection. And so flap anatomy is a really great alternative to grave robbing, which of course we cannot condone. So we have here another flap anatomy. This one's a little bit later in the 19th century. And this one is specifically for obstetrics. And in case anybody out there would prefer not to see it, this does include some female anatomy. But you can see here, we have this woman. And each flap reveals more of what's going on. Until you get to the baby. And you can see how these would be really useful in terms of learning, you know, different methods for making sure that baby comes out safely. Okay, that's the last flap. And I do have to note that the Becker Medical Library over on the medical campus has quite a few of these and an even better collection than we do specifically of flap anatomies. They have some really fantastic ones over there. This one even further kind of mimics that dissection aspect. And then you get twins. Going back to our Arnold collection of sign symbols and languages, this is a text that was handwritten by William Goddard, and he decided that the British Navy's system for communicating with other ships wasn't working. They were spelling out everything letter by letter, and Goddard was saying, like, no, you shouldn't be doing it that way. And so he devises this entire system, which you can see, this was written by his own hand. He did the drawings, where instead they're going to use a code. And so the volvelle, again, that spinning wheel, is how you would code and decode those messages that would be sent, rather than spelling everything letter by letter. And so you would line these up based on, you know, what he's telling you in the text here. And so if an S is being sent, that actually means a 0. The British Navy did not adopt his system, so this text also talks about the process of having his system be denied. So as you can see, until about the 19th century, most of movable books are educational. A lot of them are specifically for adults. But not entirely. This is a really fun book called a tunnel book. And these were created entirely for entertainment. So this one is from around 1827. And what you do is you pull it up so you can look through the hole. And then you can see all of these layers lining up to create this kind of three-dimensional image. And so you can see a little bit of what's going on. Here it is from the side. So you can see how they would be stacked strategically on top of each other. This is coming around kind of in that same time as photography, and became a really popular way of capturing and memorializing different events or images. I'll try to get that lined up for you there. And we have a few of these. Here's another. And I love this one. Here we go. So this is gardens, which you can kind of see. And then there's also a couple different avenues that you can stroll down the gardens. So you can see that there's 3 entry points. So you can get 3 different views of these gardens. So once we get to the 19th century, we start having a lot more books for children because, you know, the Industrial Revolution happens. We have a little bit more leisure time, a little bit more emphasis on children being children and not really working in as much. So we get this whole explosion of children's books, and different publishers are trying to find ways of engaging children and making it fun for adults too. So this is one of our early children's books from the Hochschild collection called This is the House That Jack Built. And this has been beautifully hand colored as well, which I absolutely love. And all of the little tabs move the different things that are happening. So little rat's head moving there with the tab. And this is what's referred to as a cumulative tale. And so there's a lot of repetition. This is the house that Jack built. This is the malt that laid in the house that Jack built. This is the rat that ate the malt that laid in the house that Jack built. So you can see it's very repetitive. It kind of has a nice rhythm to it, which can be fun for children. And then the added bonus of the moving parts. I'm going to see if I can zoom in close enough so you can actually see. Yep. So this is a little metal rivet here that's allowing these parts to pivot when I'm moving the tab. But just a really fantastic, fun book. Now, I can't talk about early movable books without talking about Lothar Meggendorfer, who has just a really fantastic name, which you can see if you're interested in the spelling or looking up more about Lothar Meggendorfer. He's right there. He was working in Germany and really fantastic paper engineer, doing a lot of different things and kind of pioneering a lot of these different techniques. This is Curious Creatures, and I absolutely adore this book. His books were translated into lots of different languages so that they could be sold in London, as this one was. And this is a little hedgehog who comes out of his shell. Just absolutely adorable. And one of the problems with movable books is that movable parts break very easily. But with this one, it actually gives us insight into what's going on in between those pages to make those animals move. This one is on our conservation wish list. We are hoping that we will be able to have a paper engineer do some repair and get it back to its original working shape, especially taking off this terrible tape. But you can see kind of how these would move in these little metal rivets with handwritten instructions. So you would pull, this tab would come out the bottom, and somehow these would all interact in order to make these animals move in a very specific way. And this goes to show how much work goes into every single movable part. And one of the things that really fascinates me about movable books is even today, every single movable element has to be constructed by hand. There are not machines that we have invented that can do this for us. And so there's a lot of handwork still going into these today. Not all of our Lothar Meggendorfer books are in terrible condition. This one is absolutely fabulous. Again, we've got these little adorable animals. moving in several directions at the same time. And every single movable in this book still functions. And the owl at the end is one of my favorites. Just so cute. And again, this was hand colored to add that color that children would love to see. So movable tabs, as you can see, are very popular in terms of children's books, but we have a lot of other things going on as well. This is an ABC book with spinning wheels. And so this would help a child learn their alphabet in German for this particular book. And what you can do is you can spin this wheel. I'm going to find one. Here we go. Still nicely intact. And different images would pop up, all starting with that same letter, so that they can explore that letter and how it is used in a lot of different words. And then you have this fantastic poem down at the bottom. And I'm assuming, based on my very limited German, that the poem goes along with the images that are coming through this window as you spin the wheel. And the wheel is created so that there's images on both sides. You can see A and B, and you're spinning the same wheel in order to get those images on either side. So we're going to go with a different wheel for this one. This is Fairy's Playtime. And this one is just so cool. I love this one so much. I haven't been able to find the official term for this. So I've been referring to this as a transformation wheel. And it was created by Ernest Mister. And so you pull the string and the pieces of paper go behind the little cutout. So you can barely see these little lines. Those are cuts. And so when you spin it, the picture transforms from one to the other by hiding one image behind the other. And so there you have Puss in Boots. Yeah, I love this one so much. It's so fun, and it's still completely intact, which again, from 1903, it's absolutely amazing, especially, probably having been very loved by a child. So we're going to go back to Lothar Meggendorfer for a second, and this is Gross Menagerie, which is Big Zoo. And so these are different portfolios. So not a bound book like we've been looking at. And I should have practiced this with camera, because when you lift this up, you get a three-dimensional kind of zoo-like structure, just like we were looking at with the tunnel books. And let me find one without the plastic. Okay, here we go. So you can see, kind of the similar experience as if you were going to go to a zoo and see these animals at the zoo yourself. You've got these little girls and the monkeys in the cage, and again, using kind of that tunnel book-like structure, several layers to create depth. And these are created in such a way that you could set up several of them at the same time, kind of create this whole zoo feeling with all of these exhibits of animals around you. You've got this nice poem to go along with each of the panels, and the animals in their natural habitat, in order to kind of know which panel is which and see what you're going to find inside. that one's not opening well, and I am not going to force it. Let's see. Here we've got a good one. Yeah, I had never seen anything like this before finding this book, and I love it. You can tell I really like these books a lot. So the set of pop-up books that we are probably most familiar with is contemporary pop-up books for children. And that is still a huge genre. There was a resurgence in the 1970s that really just took off, and pop-up books are still everywhere. I know that I buy them for my nephews, but there's quite a few different ones. And so a lot of them are focused mostly on learning, because there's something a little bit more experiential about a pop-up book and interactive about a pop-up book than a book that isn't movable. And so this is a counting book. It's a very simple one. 1 bug, 2 bugs, 3 bugs. So not complicated. This is what's called a V-fold. So you can see it's popping up from the fold there. This is also referred to as a self-erecting pop-up book, where it, when you open the page, it pops up. So I don't have to do anything extra like pull a tab or move a string in order to get that motion. And it gets more complicated as we keep counting. And in this caterpillar to butterfly, again, a self-erecting pop-up book, you get that additional movement of the caterpillar coming out. So again, kind of just that little bit of extra that can really help children learn. And so in the vein of learning, we have pop-up shapes. And this one really nicely helps you identify the shapes. And it has lots of different moving aspects. So you can spin the wheel here and change the lights on the traffic circle, which also spins the wheel. The pop-up triangles with some nice movement. Our squares and rectangles. And so again, this just allows children a little bit more interaction than your standard book. We can't talk about children learning without some ABCs. So we are back to, flaps plus pop-up. This little dragon here playing the drums for D. But again, when you're looking at the text, can you find a D that quacks her babes so her babes will hear? And so you have the child look for the duck, and again, that interaction element to these movable books. And some of them get a little bit more complicated. So you can see the structure of the dinosaur is quite intense, really well done. Sure. Camera a little higher so you can see this whole dinosaur. So we've gone from very simple counting to a book for children a little bit older or adults. I know many adults who love this book, including me. And of course, we have some pop-ups that are a little bit more abstract. So this is a how many book where you are supposed to have children count here. that is just absolutely beautiful and sculptural. And the questions they're asking are actually pretty hard. How many triangles are in the borders of the page? So that's quite a bit of counting. Can you count all the triangles in the pop-up? Look from every angle. So they're asking how many triangles here. But I think this one is just an absolute marvel of paper engineering that is celebrating what pop-up books can do in addition to teaching children how to count. And so this would be very fun for adults and children at the same time. So the last category that I want to cover is our category of pop-up books and movable books for adults. And so we're going to continue that with books made for learning. I do want to note that we have so many books in the collection for children that aren't specifically about learning. I just think that's something that movable books do especially well. Like this book, which, yes, this could certainly go to an older child or a teenager, but with the amount of information on these pages, everything that's going on, I would say that the age range for this really does include adults, especially because of how intricate everything is. But we're talking about architecture here. And so we're talking about something, a subject where it can be easier to learn if you're able to see what is happening in the architecture in 3D. And so the author and paper engineers are able to use these self-erecting pop-ups in order to really show what's going on in this building in a way that a two-dimensional image wouldn't be able to capture as well. And this one you actually have to like Velcro together in order to get the rounded part there. So some of the books we have for adults are for adults because they're cheeky, and those can be really fun. This one was actually created by a graduate of WashU, Cherry Berry, and this has the best book enclosure that I've ever seen. It is a bra hook on a history of the bra, which I just think is absolutely wonderful. And it uses moving elements in really inventive ways. This is the table of contents, which is just absolutely delightful. As well as pop-up elements to, help to visualize this history that it's talking about. And the pop-ups here are tongue-in-cheek. They're funny. It's just a lovely book and actually a really great history. We also have the Naughty 90s. And this is a tongue-in-cheek etiquette book. And you can see it's a saucy pop-up book for adults only. With flaps. You can see the can-can girls and their legs, which would have been scandalous in the 1890s. You can see his hand coming out to touch things that he shouldn't. And a flap that you lift to see what's going on under the table. So again, just very, very playful, but not necessarily a topic you would want kids delving into. We do actually have 2 pop-up Kama Sutras that are very not suitable for work, so I'm not going to be showing those, but those are available and in the collection, just in case you were wondering kind of how far do pop-up books go. This is another favorite of mine, the Pop-Up Book of Phobias. So if you have any phobias, this might be a good time to look away. We're going to start with the dentist. And this was created in such a way, it's harder to tell on camera, but for me as the person opening the book, this dentist is really coming at me. You know, that drill is kind of coming at my face. You know, so it was created in order to kind of replicate that experience of the phobia, which isn't great if you actually have a phobia, but it's really fascinating as a reader. Again, you feel like you're sitting on the airplane with this tray table in your lap. All of these snakes coming at you. And this one, the pages don't open because this is for claustrophobia. And so the tightness of this page not allowing to open, again, is recreating that experience of feeling trapped. Public speaking, which thankfully I do not have phobia of. We're going to skip the spider, but this is one of my favorites, fear of heights. And so looking at this book, it feels like you're on top of this building, looking down at the street. Again, just kind of recreating that whole experience of being in these situations. So one of the other categories of pop-up books for adults are ones that are sculptural, that really try to kind of push the bounds of what's possible with paper engineering. And this is one that I borrowed from Art and Architecture. And this is referred to as a 360 book. And this was all laser cut. So you get more of this sculpture than anything else, which is just absolutely beautiful. And the artist has created quite a few of these, you know. So looks like a fairly standard book, but is more of a sculpture. This is a part of a series from the artist Talba Auerbach. I hope I am saying her name right. And the series is called 2-3, and it's all about two-dimensional, three-dimensional. And so looking at how paper can be both. And each one is its individual folio. And when you get these really just absolutely amazing paper sculptures that start two-dimensional, folded completely flat within the folio, and then expand to become three-dimensional. And these are quite large, as you can see by how far I had to raise the camera up and my hand for scale. You can see kind of how it just completely collapses down, you know, even though it's this rather large, quite impressive structure. And some of the folios in here are actually too tall for me to be able to use my camera system, which I think is absolutely amazing. So I want to talk, actually, I'm going to go to this one next. There are a lot of book artists who use movable elements in their artist books for various reasons. And this is a really fantastic one because this is Body of Inquiry. And this is actually a play on a flap anatomy, as we were seeing earlier in some of our earlier artist book or movable books. And so rather than going with like a very strict anatomical, flap for these. She's looking at different typography, the way that the organs and women are seen and treated in order to create this commentary. And there's just lots of layers here. And over here, we look, knowing she is more than her parts. So looking past all of these parts of this, very anonymous female, model. And the format of this book really fascinates me because it can be like a science fair, kind of that threefold. But to me, it also looks a bit like a restaurant menu. And I'm still trying to figure out kind of how I'm thinking about this and the connection that might be between this look of a restaurant menu with this very anonymous mannequin woman with kind of her parts on display. So still trying to think through that a little bit, but hopefully I'll be able to have some conversations about this in some classes and with my colleagues over at the Becker Medical School. So here we go. So the Movable Book Society, they are an official society, and they had their 25-year anniversary back in 2018, and they put out a set of cards from A to Z in order to celebrate that anniversary. And each of them are made by a separate paper engineer, basically celebrating what it is that paper can do and how paper can move. And so I've chosen just a couple of my favorites. So B, and this lovely little bird. Of course, C is for Cassie. So we have the third letter of the alphabet transforms into a C. I think it's so very clever the way that is working. And I don't know why I love this G so much. It's just so elegant. It's simple and lovely, but I just like it. I don't have to have a reason. But there is, the full alphabet in that set from the Movable Book Society. So that is everything that I have pulled to share with you today. We have plenty of time for questions, so please remember to put those in the Q&A. My colleague Elizabeth Brander from Becker has already taught me more about the anonymous woman. Thank you so much, Bess. We're going to have to talk about that a little bit more. But again, questions, please. Tell me what you would like to know more about.
Well, Cassie, we actually have one that came in the chat earlier, which was how long have these types of pop-up books been around, and have mechanical elements of pop-up books been used in the past for medical or industry books?
Absolutely. So the first known movable book is that volvelle, that wheel that spins, and we have one from the 14th century. We think that they were used as early as the 10th century, but we don't have examples from that early. So we're just kind of guessing on that based on other information. These were absolutely used. The flap anatomies were used very much in the medical field. My colleague Elizabeth will know a lot more about that than I do, so you can certainly follow up with her. But she was explaining to me that it can be really difficult to get corpses, and so instead of doing live dissection, you can use those flap anatomies to kind of mimic that as a way to not grave rob, which of course cannot condone grave robbing. Even if it is
I think it's good that we're letting everyone know we do not condone grave robbing. That's
so very much used in terms of practice, and I think I've heard of some examples where it might be used, like the obstetrics book might be used in the field, and so you would be there with a pregnant mother, and the baby's in trouble, and so you flip to that page to figure out, how do you turn the baby? and like what is needed in order to make sure that baby is delivered safely.
So we have a question, a Q&A from John Walsh asking, how much more difficult and or expensive is it to produce these books? And has this changed over, how has this changed over time?
We just keep inventing new technologies in order to create different types of movable books. So started with the volvelles and moving to the flaps. You know, the self-erecting pop-ups show up in the early 20th century. But you can see like Lothar Meggendorfer was really doing some fantastic things with the little rivets and pull tabs. And so I think we're just adding. I don't think there's any movable book technology that we've gotten rid of and are no longer using. We also have a lot more printing techniques. So like the laser cutting of that 360 book, to hand cut that would be kind of ridiculous and really difficult to get correct. And so the fact that we have laser cutters available now, I think makes things a lot easier. And so we're just finding new technologies in order to keep inventing new ways of making paper move. And I hesitate to say this because I don't know a whole lot about it, but I believe that there are some paper engineers who are actually working on like medical developments in order to have something two-dimensional like be inserted and then become 3D, like inside the body. Definitely check me on that before you share that information. But there's a lot of fascinating implications.
Definitely. Well, we've gotten 2 questions about the sort of print run publishers do on movable books and asking if are lots of these done by hand? Are they done, as you mentioned, laser cutting, and how many are being produced? And are some of them still done by hand as well as mass produced?
As far as I know, every single pop-up book has to be assembled by hand. And so there's still a lot of handwork being done. You know, even if you are using the laser cutter, you still have to have somebody glue that flap in the right place.
And gotten actually a couple of questions related to paper engineers. Is their training engineering or art, and where do you find these people? Are they a rare breed, or are they like everywhere now?
I have no idea. I know about them from the Movable Book Society. I think like that society would be a really great way to find paper engineers. And yeah, I have some artists in my head because the back of each of the cards has a profile on the paper engineer that created that specific letter. But I don't know what their training is. I think a lot of it is going to be art, especially thinking about specifically producing movable books, you know, kind of that more of that artistic engineering angle. The people who might be working in the medical field, they're probably more of like an engineering place. And paper engineer is a broad term that covers, you know, both the people creating movable books and then engineers working with papers in kind of those medical, much more scientific ways. So I just, very broad term. I don't know exactly where you find them outside of the Movable Book Society.
That's really interesting. Well, actually, Denise Ward Brown had asked and said she would like to bring her 2-dimensional design class to see these books. So this is a perfect transition to talking about teaching with them. She's taught a pop-up book unit for the last 4 years and would love to bring in her students. And she also asked if we're able to see Bob Smith's books.
So we definitely had some of Bob Smith's books kind of in with what I was showing. I don't remember which ones exactly belong to Bob Smith, but there were certainly some in there. And as far as teaching, I use these in pretty much any class I can get away with because they're so fun and they're so engaging. It's a really easy way to get students interested in rare books, because when you think rare books, you don't think pop-ups, you don't think movable books. And so I use them a lot in our typography classes, especially the Movable Book Society's A to Z, because it's a really great way to rethink letters and how letter forms work. They're also integrated into a lot of our communication design classes in terms of our book arts, just to make sure, you know, students are thinking outside of the box and kind of outside of that two-dimensional codex model that we're so familiar with in terms of the book. And Denise, please feel free to email me. I love working with classes.
That's wonderful. So do movable elements other than clasps ever appear in bindings that you were aware of?
Ooh. I'm not sure about things other than clasps. We do have some bindings that are interactive, but movable and interactive, can be simultaneous and can be two separate things. I'm thinking about a book we have called Templum Elementorum, which is actually in this like huge museum crate, and you have to assemble it like on a light up stand as an alchemy, like kind of, it looks like a chemistry set almost, like you're about to do experiments. And then once you open the bindings, there's pop-ups within that as well. And so that's more interactive than movable. But I'm gonna have to look and investigate that, because it's a really interesting question that I want to know more about.
So what do you think attracts people to create these kind of books?
They're fun. I think they're so engaging because you've got that that eye-catching movement, you've got that, lots of color and lots of ways to experiment and do things differently. And so I think there's just a lot that you can do in terms of movable books, and a lot more ability to kind of play when you're no longer confined to this two-dimensional page. All of a sudden you can have these dinosaurs coming up at you, or the dentist trying to, be right in your face. There's just something a little bit extra about it in a really nice way.
Very good. Let's talk about gender. Is this a gendered process, creating pop-up books? Are there many women among the engineers that we see as book artists and paper engineers?
Currently, I would say it's not gendered, and I'm seeing quite a few men and women, both as collectors and as paper engineers and makers, which I think is really fantastic. In earlier times, I'm not sure exactly what the division would be, but most likely it would have been the men doing the writing and the printing and the publishing, but often women and children were used in terms of hand coloring illustrations. And so I could see them being used for those movable elements as well, kind of that very specific handwork that could be taken piece by piece and done at home.
How do we acquire these pop-up books in our collection, and do people donate them to the library?
Yes, so most of our pop-up books and movable books have been donated either through Bob Smith or Susan Schwartz. And we're very grateful for those donations, because otherwise we would not have been able to build such a large collection. We have a little over 800 movable books according to our catalog. It might be higher than that depending on which terms were used. And as I said, some of them came in through the Arnold collection. I do add things to the collection through purchase when I can, and those usually kind of cross over between the movable books and the book arts. So it'll be book arts with movable elements.
Dave asked, am I correct in remembering that Euclid's Elements had pop-up flaps to illustrate 3D geometric models? And does the Washington University Library have any copies?
We do not have that one, and I want it so bad. It is so cool, and I wish I could share it with all of you. You're gonna have to find some images. It's an early math textbook working with Euclid's geometry, and you pull the string, and the little paper comes up to create these geometric elements to help you better understand the math that is going behind them. It's an absolutely amazing book, and I would love to get my hands on one.
So Dave, if you have one in your back room or basement, let us know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that off your hands.
Figured as much. So let's touch base again. I know we discussed a little bit about medical history, but Dave says no.
Fair enough, Dave.
Darn it all. Anyway, can you talk a little bit about the early medical history in any of these movables? And I'm not sure if that's really in your area or if we need to loop someone in with Bess.
That's much more in in Bess's area than in mine. I know very little about medical history outside of kind of the individual books that I've worked with, and kind of a basic understanding that there is medical history and it's there. But I'd be happy to put whoever asked that question in touch with my colleagues over at Becker who can give a much better answer than I can.
We will do that. Aiden will connect you with Bess so you can ask a couple more of those questions. So, and Peggy asked, how does or how will 3D printing fit in with this type of book?
That's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think 3D printing tends to be three-dimensional only. And one of the things that's really fascinating about pop-ups is, especially as we see in Talbot Auerbach's work, it's both two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And so it's got that transformation element. And so I'm not sure that 3D printing that is only three-dimensional and cannot be kind of collapsed down will fit into that, and unless there's still kind of that collapsing element or that movable element. But I think there are artists out there who have much better ideas than I do, who could figure out how to make that work and make it fantastic.
Sounds very good. So how do you exhibit these? Obviously, we have this collection of 800 books, but they clearly can't all be on display at all times. So how do we exhibit these at Washington University?
So a lot of what you've seen here today is going into our exhibit next month. And yet we cannot display all of them at once. And so it's my job as curator of the exhibit to pick which ones I think are going to tell kind of the best story and be most engaging for people. The hardest part for me is, how do I show that transformation element, especially with books that are still flat. So like the kind of the spinning wheels with Lothar Meggendorfer, or those pull tabs, because without the ability to touch the book, which you can't do once we put it in a glass case, you can't really see how that's working. One of the things we're playing with is possibly recording videos and making GIFs of each of the movable elements, which is going to take quite some time, and possibly putting that on an iPad. Ideally, in my head, you would be able to go to the iPad, select the book, and kind of move a little slider back and forth to do that transformation yourself. I don't know if that technology exists or if we have the ability to be able to do that, but you do lose that kind of that element of play and that transformation that you get with so many of these movable books when you put it behind glass and don't let anybody touch it.
So what is the oddest movable book you've ever come across?
Oh goodness, there's so many. When I was looking for books about like teaching children and education, there's one all about like brushing your teeth. And like the little pull tab, get to brush your teeth. You know, it is something that kids need to learn. The pop-up Kama Sutras were kind of shocking in the stacks because it shows a lot. But again, great for learning. Yeah, I mean, there's movable books really just encompass like all of the fields and all of the topics. It doesn't seem like there's anything that they're not willing to cover. So if you can think of it, somebody's probably made it into a movable book, which I just think is delightful.
I would agree with that. So Cassie, obviously things are a little different still right now. How does someone get to see more of our collection? You've done a great job of demonstrating it on camera. I love the fact that we have the technology to do what we've done today, but tell us how they might see these things in the future.
So we are hoping that as the pandemic keeps getting, hopefully going away, we'll be able to have more people into the library. We do think that we will be open to WashU card holders for the fall semester, and we'll be able to take appointments in the reading room for people to come in and look at these books. Otherwise, our exhibits, we don't have many of these online yet, but there are quite a few collections where you can go and browse some movable books. The Smithsonian had an exhibit quite a few years ago, but Ellen G.K. Rubin, who's known as the Pop-Up Lady, did a talk on them. So if you're interested in movable books, I highly recommend her. If you're interested in finding more about ours, I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to be open, but you are always welcome to email me, and I will try to, get you as much access as I'm allowed. And that could mean, a Zoom talk like this, where, the two of us kind of go through and, look at books together through the camera, because that's safe and that's allowed. Hopefully we'll be able to let more people into the reading room soon.